I'll keep coming back to the campaign we did for you because it worked really well. And it has patterns that continue to work really well for other people to use. So one of the things that was really, really powerful about that set of campaigns was the fact that you had true triggers in there. We knew why we were reaching out to these people. We didn't reach out to everybody that you wanted to work with the exact same message. We personalized it. So to broaden this out a little bit, we might, reach out to folks who we see they're running LinkedIn ads, but they're not doing these other things. Or we see that they're selling on Amazon or they're selling on Sephora, but they're not yet on Amazon, for example. Different things like that could be a really meaningful piece of personalization that you don't have to write that specifically. You can pull that list and have that fact be true for, say, 100, 1,000, 2,000 people, whatever it is. And you build these sort of micro verticals within your outreach. That allows you to tailor it to them and have a personalized feel without having to dig through their LinkedIn, see if they actually posted anything that might be relevant, try to shoehorn that into your copy. That doesn't scale really well, but finding those micro verticals does.
All right, welcome to today's VidTao podcast. This is VidTao co-founder Ian Naj. And before we get into the content for today, just wanted to let you know that right now you can try VidTao, our YouTube ad library with over 7 million indexed, unlisted YouTube ads and landing pages and funnels for free. You can try it for free for 7 days. Just go to vidtao.com, vidtao.com, and check it out. This podcast is also sponsored by Inceptly.com. Inceptly is a direct response video advertising agency, and it's generated over $950 million in direct response revenue for Inceptly's clients via video platforms like YouTube, YouTube Shorts, TikTok, Meta, and more. They're experts in both producing high-performing direct response video creatives and also scaling the ad accounts themselves, so expert media buyers, and very important, custom deep data analysis to make sure your tracking and attribution is 100% rock solid and tailored to your unique business and funnels. So if you're already spending at least $1,000 per day on ads and looking to take your results to the next level on platforms like YouTube, YouTube Shorts, Connected TV, and more, go ahead and claim a free brainstorm session with the Inceptly team. Just go to inceptly.com/vidtao. That's INCEPTLY.com/vidtao and claim a free brainstorm session. And just so you know, this is not a sales call. On this brainstorm session, the Inceptly team will work with you to uncover insights you and your team can use to unlock new opportunities and scale on video traffic platforms. Just go to inceptly.com/vidtao to claim your spot.
Welcome to the show, Elyse Savaki, outreach email writer, writer extraordinaire. Fantastic to have you on our show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I just for some context, for a long time, like email drove a lot of sales for us. Continues to do so as an agency, and Elyse actually wrote some of those initial emails, and so some of them we've still been using, and fantastic copy and strategy. So the idea with today's call really is just dive into, how you think about outreach specifically for traffic agencies, for service providers, and, other folks who are trying to get customers via outreach on, email. We can talk about LinkedIn, and whatever other, shiny object platforms you think might be interesting. But first, just wanted to take a step back and ask, how did you get into all this? Like, how did you end up in this space?
I started my career in sales. Just funny. For some reason, I always wanted to be a marketer. Like in high school, in college, that's what I thought I wanted to do. And then I ended up in sales because that was really the easiest route. I didn't even plan that. I got plucked out of the coffee shop I was working in for basically door-to-door sales to specialty coffee shops. And so through that, though, I was doing a tiny bit of emailing then. Not well, not good at it. I had a few different sales roles that I could have really benefited from email, couldn't quite figure it out. Ended up in SaaS sales where we were purely inbound. So I thought I had landed like the holy grail of sales jobs. And eventually we hired a rep who came from a recruiting background. And the first thing she did was ask for a list and then proceeded to dominate our inbound. And so like 70% of the leads went to her because she'd already been doing outreach to them. And that was the first time I really realized the power of outreach and then started getting interested in copywriting. Another really good friend of mine had a car dealership and was very into direct response marketing as part of his business and trying to drive traffic into his dealership. And so he would feed me things. And that kind of gave me my segue into the direct response world, which then looped back around to writing cold email. Because it all just sort of, once I understood the direct response principles, the cold email got a lot easier.
Yeah, and I mean, I know you've been doing this for over a decade at this point, so
Yeah,
which is crazy because you think about like all these
you're telling
multi-touch.
me.
That's right. Well, I mean, how have you seen it change over a decade? I mean, email, everyone, like every year someone goes, oh, this is the year the email dies, right? So I'm just curious, what are you've earned some battle scars over 10 years doing this. Like, I'm just curious about the the status now versus what you've seen over this tumultuous decade.
I think I have a sort of unpopular opinion on this in that I don't personally feel like that much has changed in the way I write copy. Um, if I look back over, I still use some of the structures that I was using, darn close to 10 years ago. But I think the reason why not that much has changed for me is because it's underpinned by those really core principles that come from the direct response side of things. That, and it's also always been underpinned by being somewhat human, doesn't have to be personalized per se, but treating the other person on the other side as if I'm actually sending an individual email to somebody, whether or not I stalk their cat to find out what his favorite treat is or not. But doing that, oh gosh, I just totally lost my train of thought.
Things haven't
Uh,
used the perennial sort of strategies that underpin.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's a big piece of that, a big piece of authenticity, like where a lot of people are looking at tactics, like how do I squeak this out of it, or how do I somehow like con this person in answering this email? I've never been super big on those. And I think part of the reason is I wrote in agency context for a long time where there wasn't going to be an SDR there. There wasn't going to be somebody like the leads had to be fairly qualified because they were either going to land with the founder or they were going to land with a full cycle rep who
Oh,
had,
wow. Mhm.
uh, enough other stuff on their plate. They needed to be selling, not doing the bulk of the qualifying. And so the messages had to be real and they had to land right and be informative enough for somebody to say yes to a meeting. Um, so I think those are things that really are very important to not having to be tactic jumping all the time and driving yourself crazy trying to keep up. What has changed is on the deliverability side, things have gotten far more aggressive. But the way at the volume that I've always had to write at, like for the agencies that I wrote in when I was starting out, we always had to follow pretty much the principles that now everybody is having to follow today. So for me, that's not that different. And that's stuff like not a lot of graphics in your emails, probably none, right? We strip out the signatures, minimal links, if any. Some of this will depend on who you're messaging, like how stringent their email filters are, and things like that. But for the most part, if you follow those very stringent best practices, it's never going to hurt you. That's only going to help you. When you're emailing big corporate, that means actually getting through their spam filters and into somebody's inbox. When you're emailing small business owners, that might mean ending in the primary inbox instead of the promotions tab where they'll never see you.
Got it. And so, I mean, you mentioned strategies and avoiding tactics, and immediately I start thinking about all these tactical questions I want to ask you. But
I mean, that's fine.
yeah,
Tactics
yeah,
have a place, but there's
yeah,
some that last longer than others,
yeah.
right? So fire away and I'll give you my potentially unpopular opinion on them.
Well, yeah, I mean, you mentioned something super interesting, which is, no images, no, not even any links. So basically it sounds like the first point of contact you're going for is someone actually replying. You're not getting them to schedule like on that first email.
Normally.
Yeah.
And so most people will tell you if you pull out all the links on the first email, you'll get better stats potentially through the rest of your sequence, even when you add a couple in. I don't always succeed in getting people to pull all the links out of their emails. And it's not a complete doomsday thing if you have your scheduler link in there or your link to your LinkedIn. But you should try to minimize that and certainly not have the body copy littered with links and even images. So I'm not backpedaling against what I said, but there's context that then gets to get layered over that. sometimes, like for the campaign that we did for you guys, I remember there was an image of you with a coffee mug, right?
Yeah.
Um,
I wasn't going to bring that up because it's so embarrassing, but that actually really worked.
it worked really
Yeah.
well. One, not a lot of other people were doing that at the time. And you know what? There's probably still not, I don't see a whole lot of those come through anymore either. Sometimes you take a hedge on something that might hurt your deliverability because for the people who do open it, it will stand out or it will communicate something so much better to them that it's worth taking the hit because then their replies back to that are going to feed back into your deliverability. So like you might get lower opens for the things that ended up in promotions, but over time you might see that all even out because if the engagement is good, then it's clear that that was not a spam message or not an unwanted message. It was a message that's driving engagement. So as much as the deliverability pieces have gotten more stringent, they've also gotten more sophisticated in ways that benefit you if you're truly showing up with something people are interested in. I'll
Wow.
caveat all of that by saying I'm not a deliverability expert, but
I
I
mean,
don't play one on TV either, but I have a couple friends in the space and work with a couple of them. And that's the stuff that they keep feeding back to me is, there's a balancing act to have in place there. If you're trying to blast out 200 messages a day, though, you really have to fall back on the side of stringency because there's very rarely, I would say probably never, if your list is going out 200 emails a day to people or 200 new prospects a day, that's probably not, excuse me, a super tightly filtered list. Be my guess.
Interesting. I mean, how do you think about lead sourcing in that context?
So one thing for agencies, I think one of the things, I'll keep coming back to the campaign we did for you because it worked really well. And it has patterns that continue to work really well for other people who use them too. One of the things that was really, really powerful about that set of campaigns was the fact that you had true triggers in there. We knew why we were reaching out to these people. We didn't reach out to everybody that you wanted to work with the exact same message. We personalized it. So to broaden this out a little bit, we might, reach out to folks who we see they're running LinkedIn ads, but they're not doing these other things, or we see that they're selling on Amazon or they're selling on Sephora, but they're not yet on Amazon, for example. Different things like that could be a really meaningful piece of personalization that you don't have to write that specifically. You can pull that list and have that fact be true for, say, 100, 1,000, 2,000 people, whatever it is. And you build these sort of micro verticals within your outreach. That allows you to tailor it to them and have a personalized feel without having to, dig through their LinkedIn, see if they actually posted anything that might be relevant, try to shoehorn that into your copy. That doesn't scale really well, but finding those micro verticals does.
Interesting. So that's how you think about, identifying micro verticals. How do you approach that? How do you start that brainstorm process of working with a client, let's say, identifying what these super lucrative Venn diagrams might be of like 3 different concentric things?
A lot of times clients will come to me and they already sort of have a sense of what those things are because they see the patterns in the clients that come to them, or they know who they're helping. And I think that's a really important thing for agencies, especially, or anybody who has sort of a wide suite of ways they can help, to get as clear as you can on who and why and what the best use cases for that are. Because otherwise you're trying to speak to everybody. And as marketers, we all know that when you try to speak to everybody, you end up speaking to nobody.
Right.
And yet I see so many make that same mistake because sometimes it's hard to force yourself to narrow it down. So a lot of people come to me with that stuff already in mind. If they don't, then we start talking through things like, okay, well, what are the things people come to you for the most? What are the common problems that they're having? Like, what are the common characteristics that we can find in them? So it might be that we see they have a webinar that's running somewhere, but we see it's only on one channel, which leaves them at risk if that channel goes down. So we want to help them broaden that out, or whatever the other use cases are. There was a campaign I wrote for a third-party logistics provider where we went and we identified different types of e-commerce brands. So beauty, supplements, clothing, etc. And then where they were selling. So for beauty products, that might have been on Sephora, but hey, we didn't see them on Amazon. A big challenge for people getting their products on Amazon is dealing with the logistics and the shipping around that. And they had a solution that solved all of the typical challenges with that. So marketers can take that same thought process. I see that they're here, but they're not over here, which is this is the sweet spot where we can really help them. What are the main reasons people don't come over here? Well, there's a huge learning curve on the platform. There's it's expensive. They've already tried it and lost a lot of money on it. And then we look at then how do we help them not have those issues? How do we solve those problems for them, make it safe for them to even investigate this?
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. And then in terms of, so we know what companies to go after, but then in terms of who to go after these companies, how do you typically think about that?
So a few things. One, it'll depend on the size of the companies you're going after. If they tend to be small to medium businesses, you're probably going to go after the owner or CEO with that. And then whoever sort of the direct person who might be overseeing your area of specialty is. I typically like to write campaigns that head towards the CEO or owner, especially for anything that's mid-market, because ultimately they're still pretty tapped into what's going on below them, maybe not in the weeds of it, but in terms of they're talking to their whatever their management layer is over their marketing function, for example. They're talking to those people, they're engaged with those people. If you write a message that resonates with the CEO, you can get it referred down. You should also reach out to those people who are actually in charge of that domain. And I think a lot of that's going to depend on your target market. Like a lot of times clients have a pretty good sense of who they should reach out to. Although sometimes we have surprises. I wrote for a HubSpot agency where they wanted to reach out to sales leaders and we flipped the campaign and wrote to the CEOs and actually it took off after that.
Wow. Just going up the chain. It's interesting. I mean, anecdotally, just like on the sort of ad hoc outreach that at least I've done, have seen that work really well also, but occasionally I've seen it where so one of our best clients actually, the lead in was actually to someone who was like at the time, like a report to the CMO. So it was like three layers down.
Yeah.
And interestingly, and then this person ended up working their way up quite a ways as we worked with them in the company. But yeah, that initial contact was like we really made a what's the word? There's some an advocate or like a champion. So I'm just curious about like that top down approach makes perfect sense. I'm just curious about maybe some use cases for just different approaches in terms of who to talk to.
Yeah, I wouldn't leave out the other folks and only target the CEOs. A lot of times you can sort of put them it depends. So I'll give this a little bit of a caveat, but a lot of times you can actually put them in the same campaign, which a lot of people don't think you can. Here's why you can sometimes do that. Because while you're going to write a higher level message to the CEO, you're probably going to also include enough stuff in there. So when he forwards the message, he or she forwards the message down to whoever is in charge of that domain, it's somewhat relevant to them. Like there's information that they can use there to sort of start formulating whether they reach back out or not.
Right.
And so it normally still has enough. It doesn't work as well in reverse when you write an in the weeds sort of message to the folks on the ground and then also send that to the CEO.
True.
But in reverse, that tends to still work very well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
now,
that makes sense.
If you have the bandwidth, you can also split them. That's fine too, and send a very unique message to the people who are, the domain experts and a different message to the CEO. But I like to, when there isn't a really good reason for it, I tend to bundle them.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Just curious. Yeah. So
one thing about outreach is that
please.
there's no one way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of ways that work. The things that tend to backfire are the things that or don't take off or don't work very well, tend to be things that sort of lack sincerity to them, as in, or they might work for a time, but they lack longevity, are the things that aren't underpinned by good targeting and an actual helpful message.
Mm.
If
So
you focus on those, that'll take you pretty far.
Got it. I mean, and then just in terms of evaluating your messages, because, at least coming from a paid traffic background, we're talking about, we spend X thousand dollars a day on a campaign, and we're seeing a lot of volume of clicks, of purchases probably, and we're talking about, much lower volume on email here.
Oh yeah.
So how do you actually assess, like, okay, this is working, this isn't working? I'm just curious.
Sure. So ultimately, your master metric there is going to be meetings booked.
Mhm.
Like anything that is cold traffic, we're looking for a 1 to 2% conversion rate to the meeting. The better targeted your list is, the more that number will improve. Um, you know, if you're reaching out to every supplement company that has revenue of about X, and a couple other sort of generic filters like that, you can definitely expect to be squarely in that 1 to 2% if your message is really good.
Really?
If you
Mhm.
narrow that down, right, you can still hit those metrics with relatively broad targeting, but your message has to be really good. If you narrow that list down the way we were talking about and look for those folks who, all right, they're supplement brands, we can tell, like we can see that they're running Facebook ads, they're on a couple of different platforms. We can see these gaps that they have, and we can identify then a group of companies that look like that fit this general criteria. Then we can likely drive that meeting rate up considerably, because now we have a list that we know they have the problem that we solve. Whether or not they're interested in solving it is still the question, but um, we've honed in much more tightly than, hey, we see that you fit our demographic, but we don't actually. They might not even be running Facebook ads, right? We
Mm.
don't even know. We didn't pull that research.
Mhm.
The reason people tend to not pull that type of research is that it does take time. There's some tools that can help you do it, but usually there's a manual component to compiling those lists. Um, getting a VA to help you with that is very helpful. But that's pretty much the enemy of really good targeting, is the time it takes to do it right.
Got it. Makes sense. And then, so if we're looking at that as sort of the biggest picture metric, so just ballpark, how many emails in a sequence, and then what kind of
Mhm.
open rate are you looking for just down the line?
Yep. So emails in a sequence, anywhere from 6 to 9.
Okay.
I tend to go a little bit longer, but that will really depend on what sort of content do we have to share, because we're not going
Mhm.
to send just endless bump emails. We want to be able to talk to their problem, talk about solutions for it, maybe add some use cases or some case studies in there. And if I'm light on those things, then we've got to adjust strategy. It's going to be a shorter sequence.
Mhm.
Open rate wise, for the sequence on the whole, we want to see about a 40 to 60% open rate.
Mhm. Got it.
Um,
Oh, so someone opens an email from all 9 emails, 40% of those are being opened,
like
or
I want to see as close to those stats run throughout the sequence as I absolutely can.
okay.
Understanding that open rate, that the stats are likely going to trail off towards the end of the sequence.
Mhm.
Some people take that to mean that you shouldn't keep sending at the end of the sequence. Um, but a lot of times you pick up some really good leads off the last couple emails,
Mhm.
especially the one where it's like, hey, we haven't touched base. You know, some people call this a breakup email. I try not to write it that way,
Mhm.
but they're really powerful emails. And you say, hey, we haven't been able to touch base. Here's a couple reasons why. I totally understand if you already have this solved, but if you've just been too busy, let me know. I'm happy to reach back out next quarter or whenever is good for you, type of thing. Those
Yeah.
emails get a shocking number of replies,
Yeah.
because people sort of, I think, expect that the outreach will just go on forever.
Mhm.
Um, and, they don't have time right that minute, or they were in the middle, like they might have been in the middle of a launch. You don't know. Um, so giving them, I try to space that last one out and make sure it's there, because it gives them a way to reconnect in when they might be clear of whatever had them busy before. Um, so the stats do tend to drop towards the end of the sequence, but I
Mhm.
still want to see them as close to that 40 at least at the low end, close to that 40% open rate on the back end of the sequence, if I can get it there.
Got it.
I also want to see things like 5 to 10% of the people who received email clicked through on it. I want my reply rates. I would love my reply rates to be 10 to 15% of the actual opens.
Mhm.
Um,
Got it. Okay.
if I can get them higher and the more targeted the list, the more likely it'll be higher than that. But those are your baseline metrics that you are looking at. If you're not meeting that, don't go on to send all 9 steps in the sequence because something is wrong.
Yeah.
So if you're hitting like 20% open rates on your emails 1 and 2, like stop and reevaluate because something's off. It might be your deliverability, your subject line might be appalling. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, I mean, how do you actually brainstorm on that? Like subject lines, for instance, how do you?
They're usually really boring. They're usually really boring.
Yeah.
But here's why: when you send an email to somebody you know, you don't dream up some like clickbaity over the top subject line. Like you send something that is relevant to what's in there. Like the old quick question. If you look for outreach advice on LinkedIn, people drag email outreach that has quick questions subject line, but it works. It still works. That's a subject line that's been working for like 10 years and it keeps working because real people send that to each other. And especially when you're sending into like big corporate, all those get marked as like, this is an external sender. But when you're sending to small and mid-sized businesses, most of the time it doesn't have that flag on them. And it could be a product inquiry. It could be a customer inquiry. Like you kind of have to at least check it out real quick. And that's your opportunity to actually be interesting and get them to actually read it.
Interesting.
And sometimes it'll be subject matter related, like truly what's in there. Hey, see you're running Facebook ads. I'm really bad at coming up with these on the fly. It might be in Seppley's Facebook ads, right? Like it could be something as simple as that. And you kind of have to know your market a little bit to know, is this what everybody else is likely sending? Or is this market getting bombarded with emails that probably look like this? If so, then I probably need to get a little bit more creative in how I'm going to structure or in what my subject line is actually going to say. Not creative over the top, like, trying to make some weird analogy or make it clickbaity, or say clickbaity, a classic like headline. I shouldn't call classic headlines clickbaity. That is not fair. But that serious, I can't not click this and look away BuzzFeed style like headline, right? You don't need to do that for your subject lines, but you do need to figure out what is their real problem that is going to make them click this email to open it.
Got it. That's huge right there. So that gives us a lot to go out and research and find those problems and then connect that to the actual subject line that we make.
Like any kind of copywriting, like the research is the biggest piece of, or any kind of marketing really. The research is the biggest piece to getting it right. Understanding what the problem is that your prospects have or that micro vertical of prospects has is really, really important. And then equally important is understanding how you address that in a way that is different from what everybody else says. And well, not just what they say, but what they can do, right? What truly makes you unique in that space. And it can't be, well, we're really, really actually experts in this because everybody says that. And that's also, you can't really quantify that, right? You need to find the things that really make you different. And it might be your method. It might be the people who trust you with it. It might be the fact that you routinely fix failing Facebook campaigns that, I don't know, maybe you routinely fix webinars that aren't performing right because you understand the exact mechanisms that need to be in place without having to redo the entire thing from scratch, right? Like that, having we fix this without you having to go through this big pain that you think you're going to have to go through to fix it. Or this, sometimes fixing things is painful, but if you have one of those that we can help you avoid this whole mess over here, like it's not necessary to go through that, that's really powerful.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I'm just curious too, your research process, you mentioned the importance of that. And I know obviously a lot of times the client is going to have all that back knowledge, but then how do you extract that and supplement it? Just curious how you go about that process.
Well, personally, I send them a very large questionnaire.
Nice, nice.
And then, because everybody writes differently than they talk, then once they're done with that, we get on the phone and go through it together. And
Got it.
usually that helps me pull out those little pieces from them. If it's really, really hard to pull out those pieces from them, I can usually tell it's going to be like that when I look at their questionnaire. And then I know that this might be a challenging campaign. Because ultimately, when you're going through those things, like as the business owner, as the client side of this, as the person who's wanting to send the outreach, if you don't very clearly understand who you are in your market and how you serve your clients, it's going to be very hard for anybody else to invent that for you on the fly.
Yeah.
And have it be true, right?
Yeah.
So that's really the work, is whether you're doing it yourself or having somebody else help you with it, is getting very, very clear on that stuff.
Makes sense.
Especially when you're like a kind of high risk service, right? Trusting somebody with your marketing, like a Facebook agency or a YouTube agency or any sort of traffic agency, it's a lot of spend that goes behind that. So
Absolutely.
It's a big decision. If you're a copywriter reaching out to people, right, the risk factor there is pretty low for a number of reasons. If the copy doesn't work, the worst you're really out is whatever, if you put ad spend behind it, whatever ad spend that was, and the cost for the copy. But it wasn't like you had 6 months of retainer fees and then these massive traffic bills on top of it. You can probably shut that test down pretty quickly and go, okay, worth a shot, didn't work.
Right.
So when you're a big risk category like that, like you're a big chunk of somebody's business, you really have to be clear on that. Whether you're software, whether you're a service provider, an agency, that's a pretty universal.
Makes sense. I'm just curious also about your, now with AI and everything. So GPT, how are you leveraging all that stuff?
Minimally,
yeah.
Mostly because actually there's a few really good tools for it, and the legwork to get to the point where it gives you output that is faster than I can just do it myself is considerable. And I haven't spent as much time on this as I should have. But for people who think they can just pop things into ChatGPT and get really good outreach copy back out, yes, but your lead time on that, like your inputs before you ever pop it in there, are going to be large. Sean Vosler is somebody who does a lot with AI and Jasper, and he was like, look, I wrote a whole book in like 10 minutes, but like there was 10 to 20 hours of prompt engineering before he did that, right? And I think that's a piece that people don't understand as well. That said, agencies are probably already looking at that and are probably better positioned to make use of the tools, as long as they understand. I mean, they have to if they're generating content for people with this stuff, but there are some good tools for it. The more niche your industry, I think the more difficult it gets, which is part of why I've spent less time on it than I would have liked to. I write for a lot of enterprise tech as well as agencies and things like that. And the enterprise tech, I find a lot harder to get useful information, to get it to take in the information and spit out something that is usable.
Yeah, for sure.
That's not part of the web it covered, apparently.
Yeah. It's 20% of the up to September 2021, right? Yeah.
And things in that space change so much that like info from 2021 is not necessarily useful to the stuff so. I mean,
just look at nowadays, it's like every 2 days or every day there's something entirely new that shifts everything. So it's crazy.
But yeah, so minimal on that, but it can be done. And Copy Factory is a tool that is very helpful for that once you get your template set up in it. So there's a handful. That's like a specialty outreach-based tool, and probably shortens the learning curve the most of any of them that I've seen for this specific application.
Got it. And then what about for actual, email outreach? What are you a fan of? Like Lemlist, SuperSend? Just curious what tools you see working well for clients.
Lemlist. So I'm a big fan of looking at what the outreach agencies are using.
Yeah.
Because the agencies have, hopefully, if they're decent, as a rule, they've been thinking about deliverability for a long time because they've had to at the volume that they send. So the tools that they're using typically have the right deliverability tools in place already.
Okay.
Lemlist is great. Quick Mail is actually launching a free version of their platform next week, I think. They literally just emailed me about this yesterday. But it'll have all the deliverability pieces in it because they're a category leader. They're one that the agencies use, but they've never had a free version. So that'll come out. Give me 1 second. Let me find my list here real quick. I wrote this up I'm tool agnostic for the most part. Woodpecker's another good one, Mailshake, and then Sales Handy is very basic, but it has most of the right features in it. So there's a decent list for you. Lemlist, Woodpecker, Sales Handy, Mailshake, Quick Mail.
Awesome. Very cool. And then, I mean, so we covered a lot. So we covered basically overall structure, how to actually do some research, headlines, basic stats to look out for. So I feel like people who are just trying to do this themselves have some good orienting points.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's no faster path to getting up and running and, success than talking to an expert, right? So if people want to talk to you, which I highly recommend they do, first of all, where can people reach out to you and find out more about what you do? And then if it makes sense, set up a time to chat and brainstorm with you.
Yeah. I'm on LinkedIn, and then my website is really simple. It's outreachcopy.com.
Outreachcopy.com.
I don't know how I got that domain.
How long ago was that?
Not long ago. I mean, 3-4 years ago, when I really rebranded everything and decided I was, going to let the B2C stuff go and only do B2B. So not that long ago.
That's super cool. That's a great outreachcopy.com, Elyse. Awesome, Elyse. Well, thank you so much for being on our show today. Appreciate it. Yeah. And everyone out there, make sure to go out outreachcopy.com and set up a call with Elyse if it makes sense for you. And I think you'll be very happy you did. So highest recommendations. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for checking out the show today. Remember that you can claim your 7-day free access to vidtao.com, our app with over 7 million unlisted YouTube ads, landing pages, and funnels. Just go to vidtao.com to start that free trial. This podcast is also sponsored by Inceptly.com. Inceptly is a direct response video advertising agency, and it's generated over $950 million in direct response revenue for Inceptly's clients via video platforms like YouTube, YouTube Shorts, TikTok, Meta, and more. They're experts in both producing high-performing direct response video creatives and also scaling the ad accounts themselves, so expert media buyers, and very important, custom deep data analysis to make sure your tracking and attribution is 100% rock solid and tailored to your unique business and funnels. So if you're already spending at least $1,000 per day on ads and looking to take your results to the next level on platforms like YouTube, YouTube Shorts, Connected TV, and more, go ahead and claim a free brainstorm session with the Inceptly team. Just go to inceptly.com/vidtao. That's INCEPTLY.com/vidtao and claim a free brainstorm session. And just so you know, this is not a sales call. On this brainstorm session, the Inceptly team will work with you to uncover insights you and your team can use to unlock new opportunities and scale on video traffic platforms. Just go to inceptly.com/vidtao to claim your spot. All right. Thanks so much for checking out our show and being part of our community. Once again, this has been VidTao co-founder Ian Naj signing off. Have a great rest of your day, wherever you are in the world, and take care.